You know how life can surprise you when you least expect it? Well, that's exactly what happened to me on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday afternoon. But let me start from the beginning. Life has this funny way of falling into patterns, doesn't it? Especially when you hit a certain age and think you've got everything figured out. My days had settled into a comfortable rhythm here in Oakwood Valley, a small town where everyone knows everyone. And change happens about as slowly as molasses in winter. Every morning started the same way. I'd wake up around 6:30, make my coffee, and sit on the old porch swing that creaks just enough to remind you it's been there for decades. The birds in our giant maple tree would start their daily chatter, gossiping about whatever birds gossip about. I'd listen to them while sipping my coffee, watching the neighborhood slowly come to life after breakfast. I'd spend time in my small garden. Nothing fancy, just some tomatoes, herbs, and flowers that somehow managed to bloom despite my questionable gardening skills. Tuesdays were for book club, Thursdays for lunch with my dear friend Martha, and weekends were for catching up on household tasks and maybe a good movie. It was quiet, was predictable, and mostly it was exactly what I needed. My husband Tom had passed away 3 years ago, and our children had grown up and moved away to live their own lives in cities whose names I could barely pronounce. So it was just me now, rattling around, in a house that felt too big some days and just right on others. The house was filled with memories, some happy, some bittersweet, and the steady ticking of that old grandfather clock in the hallway. That Tom had insisted on buying at an estate sale 20 years ago. My neighbors, the Hendersons, had been living next door for about 20 years now. Frank and Sarah were the kind of neighbors you read about in magazines, the ones who actually borrow cups of sugar and keep an eye on your house when you're away. Martha, my best friend, always joked that the property lines between our houses were purely suggestions. We'd practically worn a path in the grass from walking back and forth between our homes. Over the years, I'd watched their son Ethan grow up right before my eyes. I remembered him as a little boy with scraped knees and grass stains on his clothes. Always polite, but a bit shy. He'd wave at me from their backyard while playing with his toy trucks, and I'd wave back from my kitchen window. I watched him struggle through those awkward teenage years, saw him get ready for high school dances looking uncomfortable in his first suit, and cheered silently when he graduated and headed off to college with dreams bigger than our small town. Could hold dot time has a way of flying by when you're not paying attention. One day he was a gangly teenager with braces, and the next thing I knew, he was a grown man with a master's degree, moving back home about 6 months ago. Life had come full circle, as it often does. I'd see him around the neighborhood occasionally, mowing the lawn for his parents, carrying groceries from the car, or heading out to work in his reliable but aging sedan that made a slight sputtering sound when he started it. We'd exchanged the usual pleasantries. "How are you doing, Ethan?" "Fine, Mrs. Patterson. How about you?" "Can't complain. Nice weather we're having." That was about the extent of our conversations. He wasn't that lanky teenager anymore, that much was obvious. He'd filled out, gained the kind of quiet confidence that comes with age and experience. But sometimes when he thought no one was looking, I'd catch a glimpse of something uncertain in his expression, like he was wrestling with thoughts too big for his head. I figured he was just adjusting to being back home, working remotely from his childhood bedroom, probably feeling a bit cramped after years of independence. It's not easy being a grown adult living with your parents again, no matter how much you love them. So you can imagine my complete surprise last Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. I was out front, engaged in my weekly battle with the dandelions, near the mailbox. These weren't just any dandelions. These were the kind that seemed to have roots, reaching straight down to the center of the earth. I was on my hands and knees, gardening gloves covered in dirt, probably with a smudge of mud on my cheek, knowing my luck with staying clean during yard work. The afternoon sun was warm on my back, and I was completely absorbed in my weed pulling mission when I heard a car door slam. I looked up to see Ethan getting out of his car, briefcase in hand, looking every bit the professional young man He was wearing a button-down shirt and slacks, the kind of outfit that said he'd been on video calls all day, instead of heading straight inside like he usually did. He walked over to the low white picket fence that separated our yards. He moved with purpose, like he'd been thinking about this moment all day. "Afternoon, Carol," he said, his voice deeper than I remembered from our brief encounters. It was smooth, confident, but there was something else there too, something that made me pay attention in a way I hadn't before. "Oh, hi, Ethan," I replied, trying to brush a stray piece of hair from my face with the back of my gloved hand, likely making the dirt smudge worse. "Just battling the dandelions. They're winning, I think." He chuckled, a genuine warm sound that made me smile despite my embarrassing appearance. "Looks like you're holding your own to me," he said, leaning against the fence post. He didn't seem to be in any hurry to get inside, which was unusual. Normally, he'd offer a quick wave and head straight for the house. "Actually," he said, then paused, looking down at his shoes for a moment before meeting my eyes again. Those kind eyes that reminded me so much of his mother's held something I couldn't quite identify. Was it nervousness? Determination? Maybe both. "I was wondering," he continued, his voice taking on a slightly hesitant tone. "I know this might sound a bit out of the blue, but would you maybe like to grab a coffee sometime this week?" My treat, of course. I blinked, completely caught off. Guard coffee. With Ethan. My mind immediately started racing through possibilities. Was his mother sick? Did they need help with something around the house? Was he starting some kind of neighborhood committee? Maybe he was selling something. Insurance or investment plans, or one of those things young people get involved with these days. "Coffee," I repeated, probably sounding as confused as I felt. "Yeah," he said, and I noticed a slight flush creeping up his neck. I've been wanting to ask you something. Get your perspective on a situation. Actually, I thought it might be easier to talk over coffee than shouting over the fence." He gave me a small, almost shy smile that reminded me of the little boy he used to be. "My perspective?" I asked, curiosity starting to override my initial surprise. This wasn't about needing help with household repairs or selling me something. This successful, educated young man wanted my advice about something important enough to invite me for coffee. "Yeah," he repeated, seeming to relax a little now that the invitation was out in the open. "If you're not too busy, of course. I know you probably have a lot going on." I pulled off my gardening gloves, tucking them into the pocket of my old gardening apron. The request felt genuine, and if I'm being honest, a little intriguing. It wasn't every day that the neighbor's grown son asked for my perspective on anything. Maybe my quiet, predictable routine could use a small shake-up. "Well, Ethan," I said, managing what I hoped was a warm smile, "that's very thoughtful of you. I think I could manage that. When did you have in mind?" Relief washed over his face, like sunrise. "Great. How about Thursday, maybe around 10 in the morning? There's that little coffee shop, The Daily Grind, down on Main Street. Do you know it?" "The Daily Grind sounds perfect," I confirmed. "Thursday at 10 it is." "Excellent," he said, his smile widening in a way that made him look younger, more like the boy I remembered. "I'll look forward to it, Carol. Thanks for saying yes." He gave me a little wave and headed toward his house, leaving me standing by the fence with dirt under my fingernails and a head full of questions. The stubborn dandelions were temporarily forgotten as I watched him disappear through his front door. My neighbor's son, coffee, my perspective. What on earth could he want to talk about that required my input? The quiet predictability of my Tuesday afternoon had just taken a very interesting detour, and I found myself more curious than I'd been in months. I went inside, washed the dirt from my hands and face, and spent the rest of the evening wondering what kind of situation would prompt a young man like Ethan to seek advice from his elderly neighbor. I couldn't shake the feeling of anticipation mixed with a healthy dose of daze, and my LV dose of bewilderment. Whatever it was important enough to him to step outside his comfort zone and ask. Thursday morning arrived, wrapped in that soft, early autumn light, the kind that makes everything look like it's been dipped in honey. The leaves on the maple tree were just starting to turn, and there was a crispness in the air that promised cooler days ahead. I found myself taking a bit more care getting ready than I usually would for simple errands. Not that I was trying to impress anyone, mind you, but there's something about being invited somewhere that makes you want to look your best. I chose my favorite blue knit sweater, the one my daughter had given me for Christmas, that brings out the color in my eyes, and a pair of comfortable dark slacks. I even added a touch of lipstick, something I rarely bothered with for grocery shopping or garden work. Why was I putting in extra effort? I wasn't entirely sure. Maybe it was just the novelty of it all, the break from routine. Or maybe deep down, I felt a little flattered that this capable young man, someone who was clearly navigating the complex world of adult life, thought my perspective was worth seeking out. When you reach a certain age, you don't often feel like you have much to offer the younger generation. They seem so busy, so focused on their phones and their fast-paced lives. The daily grind was already bustling when I arrived, filled with the rich, comforting aroma of freshly roasted coffee beans and warm pastries. Soft jazz music played in the background, mixing with the gentle hum of conversation and the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. Students with laptops occupied corner tables, business people grabbed quick coffees to go, and a few other locals like myself settled in for a more leisurely experience. I spotted Ethan immediately. He was seated at a small round table near the front window, already nursing a large mug of coffee and looking a bit nervous. He was dressed casually but neatly, a navy blue sweater and khaki pants that suggested he'd put some thought into his appearance too. When he saw me approaching, his face lit up with that warm smile that immediately put me at ease. He stood up politely. His parents had raised him right and pulled out my chair. "Carol, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate this." "Good morning, Ethan," I said, settling into the chair across from him. "It smells absolutely wonderful in here, doesn't it?" I don't come to coffee shops very often, but this place has such a nice atmosphere. The table was small, creating a sense of intimacy that wasn't uncomfortable, just present. It felt like we were in our own little bubble despite the busy cafe around us. I noticed he'd already ordered for me a latte with a delicate foam design on top that looked almost too pretty to drink. "How did you know what I'd want?" I asked, genuinely surprised and touched by his thoughtfulness. He shrugged, a slight blush coloring his cheeks. "I might have overheard you order it once when Mom dragged me here last month. She was meeting her book club friends, and I was the designated driver. Such a small thing, but it showed he'd been paying attention." I took a sip. It was perfect, exactly how I liked it. For the first few minutes, we chatted about comfortable, everyday things. How his parents were doing fine, though his father was complaining about his back again. The unseasonably warm weather we'd been having nice, but he was looking forward to real autumn temperatures. The noisy construction project down on Elm Street that had been going on for weeks, apparently they were finally almost finished. The conversation flowed naturally, easily. He was a good listener, really listening, not just waiting for his turn to talk like so many people do these days. He made eye contact in a way that felt respectful and engaged, asking follow-up questions that showed he was genuinely interested in what I had to say. Then after about 10 minutes of this pleasant small talk, he took a deep breath and set his coffee mug down carefully on the table. I could see him gathering his thoughts, preparing to shift into whatever he'd really asked me here to discuss. "So," he began, his tone becoming more serious, more purposeful. "The reason I asked you here today, .. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "It's about my career path, and maybe, well, life in general." I leaned forward slightly, a gesture that I hoped conveyed that I was ready to listen, really listen to whatever he needed to share. "I finished my master's degree in software engineering last year," he continued, absently tracing the rim of his coffee mug with his finger. "Got a good job with a tech company. Good salary, good benefits, good prospects for advancement." Everyone tells me I should be thrilled, and I am, in a way. It's challenging work, intellectually stimulating. He trailed off, looking out the window at the people walking by on Main Street. I could see him struggling with how to express what he was feeling. But, I prompted gently. He looked back at me, his expression earnest and searching. But it doesn't feel right. Does that sound crazy? Spent all day staring at lines of code, solving problems with logic and algorithms. It pays well, my parents are proud I can afford my own place and nice things. But at the end of the day, I feel... He paused again, searching for the right word. Disconnected. Like I'm building things that nobody really needs. Or worse, things that just distract people from what's actually important in life. I nodded, encouraging him to continue. There's this creative part of me, he said, his voice becoming more animated. Something I've always pushed aside because it wasn't practical, wasn't what smart people with good educations are supposed to do. What kind of creative part? I asked, genuinely curious now. He looked down at his hands, seeming almost embarrassed. Woodworking, he said quietly, as if admitting to some shameful secret. Ever since I was a little kid, spending time in Dad's workshop, I've loved everything about it. The smell of fresh sawdust, the feel of wood grain under my fingers, the satisfaction of taking a rough piece of lumber and turning it into something beautiful and useful with your own hands. As he spoke about woodworking, his whole demeanor changed. His eyes lit up, his voice became stronger and more confident. This was clearly something he was passionate about. Something that made him come alive in a way that talking about software engineering hadn't. I've been doing small projects in the evenings, he continued. Hidden away in the garage like it's some kind of guilty secret. Cutting boards, small furniture pieces, decorative items. It's the only time I feel completely myself, completely present. When I'm working with wood, hours can pass without me noticing. It's like meditation, but productive. He looked up at me then, and I could see the vulnerability in his eyes, the conflict that had been weighing on him. My parents think it's just a hobby, he said with a sigh. It's a nice way to relax after work, but not something to take seriously. They worry that I'll throw away a good career, all that education, all that potential. And maybe they're right. Maybe I'm being foolish. He paused, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration. But this engineering job, it feels like I'm wearing someone else's clothes. Like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not, just because it's what I'm supposed to do, what society expects from someone with my education and opportunities. I could hear the pain in his voice, the genuine struggle between duty and desire, between what was expected and what felt authentic. I guess what I wanted to ask you, he said, looking directly at me with those earnest eyes, is whether you think it's foolish to want something more than just practical security. You've lived a full life, Carol. You've seen a lot, experienced a lot. You've always seemed so grounded, so comfortable in your own skin. Is it crazy to want to follow something that feels meaningful, even if it's less secure financially? Even if it disappoints people who have expectations for you? I sat back in my chair, taking in everything he'd shared. This wasn't what I had expected at all when he'd invited me for coffee. I'd imagined maybe he was having trouble with a coworker, or needed advice about buying a house, or was thinking about getting married. This was much deeper, much more personal and important. Here was this capable, intelligent young man, successful by every conventional measure, wrestling with one of life's most fundamental questions, the tension between security and passion, between meeting others' expectations and being true to yourself. I thought about my own life, about the choices I'd made and the paths I'd taken. I thought about Tom, who had worked a steady but uninspiring job in accounting for 40 years to provide for our family. Always talking about someday opening a little bookstore but never quite finding the courage to make that leap. I thought about the dreams deferred, the what-ifs that sometimes kept me awake at night. Ethan, I said softly, reaching across the table to touch his hand briefly. Let me tell you something I've learned in my 72 years on this planet. Gaze, it's never foolish to want your life to feel meaningful. Practicality pays the bills, and that's important. Truly it is, but passion feeds. Soul and life is too short to starve our soul. He absorbed my words, his holders relaxing slightly. But how? Do you balance it? Heskid's voice a quit. How do you know if you're buying brave or just incredibly reckless? That, I admitted, is the million-dollar question. There's no easy answer. Sometimes it's about finding a way to integrate your passion, maybe not the day job immediately, but carving out dedicated time, seeing where right leads. Sometimes it's about taking a calculated leap, but the first step is acknowledging that what you feel is valid. That longing for something more, that creative itch, as you call that's your intuition talking. It's telling you something important about who you are. Wedded for almost 2 hours, he told me about the intricate little music box sesh carved the satisfaction of restoring an old piece of furniture. I sure it's about Tom's hidden dreams, about me own rediscovery of painting after Thecked's left home. How it had filled a space I didn't even realize was empty. There was no awkwardness, no sense of theogage gap being a barrier. It was just two people sharing experience vilestacial. And a search for meaning. He listened to me with the same respect and attention he'd hoped I would offer him. He asked thoughtful questions about me, painting, about how I navigated lettiness after Tom passed. It was a conversation that flowed easily, built on a surprising foundation of mutual understanding. As we got ready to leave, he hesitated by the door. Carol said, Histon, full of sincerity. Thank you, really. You have no idea how much this helped, just saying it out loud to someone who listened without judgment. Anytime Ethan is mild, and for what it's worth, I think pursuing something that makes you feel that alive is incredibly brave, no reckless. He gave me that warm, smiley gain. It's the one that reached high size. Maybe I'll show you some of my projects emote. If you're interested, I'd love that, I said, and I meant it. Walking home under the golden autumn sun, the world felt a little brighter. The conversation replayed in Mimond. It wasn't just about woodworking or careers. It was about connection, about being seen for who you are, not just Thurl. You play the neighbor, the widowed engineer, the neighbor's son. Something had shifted subtly but significantly. Simple coffee invitation had unlocked a door to an unexpected friendship, a connection that felt surprisingly deepened, remarkably comfortable. My quiet routine suddenly felt richer, imbued with a sense of officeability. That coffee meeting was an aeon off. A few days later, Ethan knocked on my door, a slightly hesitant look on his face, holding a small, beautifully wrapped red box. I finished something, he mumbled, shifting his weight. Thought, ooh, I'd like to see it. Inside was a small Yuli box crafted from cherry wood, smooth as silk, with intricate carving stuff leaves around the edges. The grind glowed warmly. It was exquisite. Ethan, this is stunning, I breathed, running my fingers over thread-tailed work. You Macathis. Yeah, he said, pride mixing with shyness. Just finished sanding it yesterday. It's not much, but it's wonderful, I interrupted gently. Truly, Yahaf, a remarkable talent. I invited Jim in, and he ended up staying for tea. Had talked more about his woodworking, his dreams of maybe someday setting up as Mel workshop, perhaps doing custom pieces or restoration. He showed me pictures on his phone, a sturdy bookshelf, a delicate birdhouse, a rocking horse he'd restored for a friend's child. Each piece held a story, a piece of him. I, in turn, showed him my paintings, landscapes, mostly pats to capture the changing light over the fields behind our town. Thequiet dignity of the old oak trees, hellocked at them with genuine interesting questions about my technique, about what inspired me. He noticed at tales the way I used color in a way few others had. It felt good to share that part of myself, something I usually licked fairly private. We started Falingentoe, an easy rhythm. Sometimes he'd stop me after work just to chat for a few minutes on the porch. Other times we'd bump into each other at the grocery store and end up talking for 20 minutes. The produce aisle. We even went for a walk in the park one crisp Saturday afternoon, crunching through fallen leaves, talking about everything and nothing. Books we'd read, funny childhood memories, the way the town was changing there. It's a comfortable silence between us, to the kind you only share with people you feel. Truly at ease with learned more about him, he was thoughtful, observed with a dry sense of humor. Thadafin caught me off guard and made mellow. He worried about his parents' guiding. Older felt a bit adrift from his college friends who were all settling down and starting families and carried a quiet sensitivity beneath his exterior. He wasn't just the neighborson anymore. He was Ethan, a complex, interesting person navigating his own path, and I realized with a little jolt that maybe he saw me as more than just Carell, the nice lady next door to he saw him as someone with thoughts, experience, and creative sparks of her own. One rainy afternoon, he called, "Hey, Carol, are you busy?" There was an odd note in his voice. "No, Ethan, just reading everything, okay?" "Sort of." He said, "I had a discussion with my dad about food working. It didn't go great. He thinks I'm being irresponsibly just, could use a friendly ear. If you're not busy, come on over." I said immediately. He arrived looking damp and dejected, sinking into the armchair by fireplace. He recounted the conversation with his father, the familiar arguments about security, wasting his education, the disappointment in his father's voice. "He just doesn't get it," Ethan said, frustration etched on his face. "He thinks because I'm good at engineering, I should love it. He doesn't understand that it feels hollow." I listened, letting him vent, offering quiet words of understanding. I didn't offer easy solutions, just empathy. "It's hard when the people you love don't understand your dreams," I said softly. "But ultimately, Ethan, it's your life to live. Your father loves you. He's worried about you." That's where his reaction comes from. "But his path isn't necessarily yours." He looked up his eyes meeting mine. "You really believe that thought? It's okay to choose a different path, even if it disappoints people?" "I believe," I said firmly, "that true contentment comes from being authentic to yourself. It takes courage, and sometimes the people who love you might take time to understand, but your happiness mates." He sat quietly for a long moment, gazing into the crackling fire lit earlier. The rain droomed against window panes. Then he looked over a different kind of emotion in his eyes. Now, not frustration, but a deep, quiet-traded "Thank you, Carol," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You always seem to know the right thing to say. You make things clearer." In Thatman, sitting there in the warm glow of firelight, sharing a quiet understanding. The connection between us felt incredibly strong. It wasn't romantic, not in the conventional sense. It was deeper than that, somehow a meeting of minds, a shared vulnerability, a mutual respect that transcended age and circumstance. It was the simple, profound comfort of being truly heard, truly seen by another human being, and that felt more unexpected, more unbelievable than anything I could have imagined when he first asked me for coffee. Didn't magically transform Yvette, but something fundamental had shifted within me, like dormant bulbs stirring beneath the earth. My day still held their familiar rhythm, the cafe garden, the book club, but they were infused with a new layer of richness. Acquiescent hum of anticipation, knowing Ethan was next door, knowing Weshard, this unexpected bond made thrilled feel a little less predictable, a little more alive. Our friendship continued to grow organically and without pressure. We'd share articles we thought the other would find interesting. He'd send mailings about new artists or woodworking techniques. I'd clip out articles about local history or promising new authors for him. Sarah, his mom, noticed, of course. "You two seem to be getting along well," she commented one afternoon as we chatted over the fence, a curious but warm smile in her face. "Ethan seems lighter lately." "He's a good man, Sarah," I replied, honestly thoughtful. "We just enjoy talking." And that was the truth. It wastes simple enjoyment of conversation off charade perspectives. He started seriously exploring ways to integrate woodworking into his life. He didn't quit his job, but converted a portion of the garage into a proper workshop, soundproofing it carefully. He started taking on small commissions, restoring an antique chair for a neighbor, building custom shelves for the local bookstore. He even enrolled in a weekend business course for artisans, seeing him pursue his passion. Evan cautiously filled me with a quiet pride, like watching a flower you carefully tended finally begin to bloom. He often credited our conversations for giving him the courage to take those first steps. You helped me see it wasn't in either slash or situation. He told me on evenings showing me a design for a beautiful inlaid table. He was planning that I could build this slowly alongside of me, other responsibilities, and in turn, his energies. Quiet determination inspired me. It picked up my paintbrushes, more often experimenting with new styles, events submitting a piece to the local art for something I never would have dreamed of doing before. Our friendship wasn't a secret, but it was ours. It existed in those shared coffees, the quiet chats on the porch, the mutual encouragement we offered each other. There was no drama, no hidden agenda, was simply real, a testament tough fact that meaningful connections can blossom in the most unexpected place between the most unlikely people if you just remain open. Looking back, the truly unbelievable part wasn't some dramatized vaunt. It was the quiet miracle of forming such a deep, respectful, and mutually enriching friendship with my neighbor's son. It challenged my own preconceived notions about age, about relationships, about where connection can be found. Ethan taught me that wisdom isn't solely the domain of the old, and passion isn't only for the young. He reminded me that vulnerability is a strength, and that listening, truly listening, is one of the greatest gifts we can offer another person, and perhaps in my own way. I offered him a safe harbor, a place where he could explore us dreams without judgment, where his quieter creative self was not just accepted but celebrated. Our story doesn't have a grand cinematic ending. There was no sudden declaration or life-altering event. Instead, it settled into a comfortable, enduring rhythm where our main neighbor's friends. We still have a coffee sometimes at the daily grind. Some my porch swing. He shows me his latest project. I show him my latest painting. We talk about life, its challenges, and its small joys. It's an unexpected chapter in my life. One it couldn't have written or predicted. Butone I cherish deeply. It taught me that growth doesn't stop at a certain age, and that the most profound experiences often arrive quietly, disguised as a simple invitation for coffee. It reminded me to look beyond the surface, to stay open to connection, and to appreciate the quiet beauty offering ship, built on mutual respect and genuine dating. And that, I think, is pretty invaluable in itself.